Our Pentecost reading continues from the book of Acts. Now there were devout Jews from every nation under heaven living in Jerusalem. And at this sound the crowd gathered and was bewildered, because each one heard them speaking in the native language of each. Amazed and astonished, they asked, "Are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear, each of us, in our own native language?" All were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, "What does this mean?" But others sneered and said, "They are filled with new wine." But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them, "Men of Judea and all who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen to what I say. Indeed, these are not drunk, as you suppose, for it is only 9 o'clock in the morning. No, this is what was spoken through the prophet Joel. In the last days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even upon my slaves, both men and women, in those days I will pour out my Spirit." Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Thanks be to God.
Well, I graduated 12th in my senior class in high school, alphabetically. And I left high school for college emboldened with a faith that was full of every single Christian buzzword and slogan you can think of. And it took about 4 months of deeply studying Darwin and Freud and Nietzsche and Jung and Erickson and Rogers, and in conversation with other young people coming to college from other faiths or from no faith at all. It took about 4 months for that loaded sloganeer that I was of Christianity to begin to melt away and leave me in a very difficult place, because my church of upbringing had not prepared me for the real world. It had not prepared me to stand against these grand ideas out there in the larger world, ideas that at the time I knew existed, but rejected them because they were seen as anti-religious. I wish someone had told me what you've been told in this church. I wish someone had been honest enough with me to lead me upon a journey of Christian faith that had some deep integrity and allowed for questioning and doubting. I wish I had been raised in a church like this, where people believed in their young ones and made it possible for them to travel to other places to learn. I was raised in high school as a sloganeer of faith, and it took a long, long time to relearn a new faith. Congregation, what you're going to hear now are some of our graduates. As we heard them at 8:30, we were amazed at what you, this congregation, you, their parents, you, the Sunday school teachers and the youth leaders, have raised up among us. They are ready for this world. They are prepared with a strong, deep, new face of Christianity. You're hearing that Christianity is going away. I suggest to you, today, these 4 young ones will be testament to the fact that Christianity is just beginning, and that Christ's voice and Spirit, as it spoke at Pentecost, is beginning to speak through young ones just like this. Put on your seatbelts, open your hearts and your minds, hear the Spirit of Christ as it moves among us.
I remember when I was sitting there waiting to depart on mission trips not too long ago. The mission trips and other activities with the church that I was involved in have all shaped who I am and what I believe in. Growing older has led me to pursue different activities while still exercising my faith in those activities. I became more involved in academics, clubs, sports, and mission trips abroad. For a long time, I was occupied with math team, lacrosse, mission trips to South Africa, tournaments, and studying, but I still managed to practice my faith. This was a struggle at first, but my discovery of the scripture in the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, helped me to be at peace with how my life and my pursuits have turned out. It reads, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such hostility against himself from sinners, so that you may not grow weary or lose heart." The race is the journey of faith, and in the same way that Jesus suffered to finally get to the right-hand throne of God, we too must persevere in order to follow the path God has laid out for us. This is encouraging to someone like me who is so dedicated to my tasks and reluctant to give up. I am blessed with the cloud of witnesses surrounding me who have all pushed me to recognize my faith in everything that I do.
Hello. I could get up here and tell you that God motivated me through my high school experience. And I could tell you that God was my main priority. But I was brought up to believe that honesty is the best policy. In all honesty, for a long time, like many, I had my doubts. I wanted closure to something of great power, but I just couldn't see the big picture. Just me being up here right now is unpredictable. 3 years ago, I could see myself in front of a crowd. I'm not gonna lie, I enjoy this kind of stuff. But being up here in front of a congregation, talking about God, that's unpredictable. That's kind of how a day in my life went for me, spiritually. My buddy Zach brought me to youth group for the first time. It might not sound like a big deal, and it probably wasn't at the time, but looking back, that day was the game changer. At first, I didn't even want to go. I said, "Zach, it's youth group, man." And he said, "No, dude, it's not like that at all. It's more fun than churchy." And he was right. Church was awesome. It wasn't churchy, and Neil was cool. All my friends were there, and the girls were there. So I kept going. Haven't missed one yet. Until I turned all adultish and got a job, and I made as many as I could. Anyway, wow, did the tables turn. The more I went, the more churchy it got. And the more I went, the less cool Neil got. All in all, the youth group really was the thing that got my faith journey started. Slowly but surely, the big picture got a tiny bit clearer. Fast forward a couple months, mystery trip. If you don't know what the mystery trip is, it's basically a trip in which we forget about our daily life and live in the moment. We try our best not to think about what's going to happen next, because that is the goal. We travel to different places where Neil finds a way to make it worth our while. And in the end, we usually are surprised to see what theme park we end up in. So why do I bring up the mystery trip? Well, this is the first time I prayed for real. The first time I talked to God like he was a friend of mine. The very first time seeing wasn't necessarily believing. We were in the midst of ending a group prayer when I decided to make my own little prayer. I kept my eyes closed for a short time after, and there was Logan Martin's first prayer. It was maybe 3 seconds long, but for good reason. I couldn't let my friends see me praying. I couldn't tell you what I said, because honestly I have no clue. All I remember is the moment. Fast forward to my first mission trip. Not only did I feel God's presence, but I began to develop a relationship. And not the kind where a heartbreak can occur, but an endless one. It wasn't until I got to interact with the Chicago community. I made friends in Chicago and got even closer to my fellow Floridians. It was the first time I connected with my peers through God. It was the night where everyone cries, the last night. It's a night in which we get to pray with whoever we want and share communion. Now let me build a mental picture here for you. It's a bunch of 10th and 11th grade boys holding hands. This goes without saying, but nobody felt the need to be cool at this point. Shortly after we began to pray for each other, the tears came. Everyone in the room was crying. It was happy tears, of course. The connection we made was real. Talking about or just saying the name God used to make me feel weird and uncomfortable. Now it gives me chills, like the good kind of chills, like the kind you get when a baby's born, or the kind you get when the Miami Heat win the finals twice in a row. In essence, this church really didn't just help my faith journey, it really was my faith journey. And I hope to continue my faith journey with this church for many days to come. Thank you.
Good morning. Through all the memories and experiences that I've been a part of, only a few things have been continuous and steadfast. This church and its congregation have been one of those rare, persistent factors in my life. Ever since I could remember, I've been supported and brought up by this church. I've walked up and sat on the stairs to the altar for the children's moment countless times, and I attended numerous vacation Bible schools. I eventually joined the middle school youth group back when David Rivers was the youth pastor. I didn't realize it at the time, but this weekly youth group that I had been cast into would become an integral part of my life. At the time I first started to go to these weekly middle school youth group meetings, my life was in a relatively dark stage. My parents had recently divorced, and I frequently faced bullies and social rejection at school. There were times where I would eat my lunch in a bathroom stall just to avoid the embarrassment of having to eat my lunch alone in front of my classmates. This constant negativity just led me to believe that youth group was just another setting for me to feel alone and unwanted. But when I went, I saw many kids getting along and enjoying themselves. I just always felt as if I was outside of all this warmth and camaraderie shared by these kids. For most of my middle school years, I only occasionally attended youth groups to please my parents. It was when I eventually aged into the high school youth group where I learned the true nourishing spirit of this church body. Within the high school youth group program, I discovered a common, unique relationship amongst teens that I have never seen anywhere else in my experience. These amazing group of kids had established an environment in which anything could be and should be shared. I specifically remember one out-of-town trip with the high school youth group in which the boys of the small group I was a part of discussed each other's personal struggles and concerns for 2 hours straight without any sign of indifference or hostility, which, as you probably know, a feat for teenagers. This group truly felt comfortable sharing their most personal issues, such as their relationships with their friends or their parents, things they would never share with anyone else in their life. I could truly feel the love and understanding these teens had for one another. This ability to bond and share amongst the youth group is something that brought me out of my pessimistic shell and helped me make my first step in the right direction. There was one single event within high school youth group that impacted my life the most, however, and that was my participation in middle school youth group as a high school leader. When Neil introduced the idea of high school guides for a middle school youth group at the beginning of this year, I was pretty reluctant to participate. I had not experienced many joyous encounters with middle schoolers at this point. But the role would provide me with volunteer hours I needed for scholarships, so I decided to attend the meeting for potential guides just to gain some more information about the job. As Neil stated at the beginning of this meeting, the meeting was really meant to scare the uncommitted guys away, and boy, did Neil get that message across. But Neil said one thing that made me committed to being a guide for these kids. As I recall, Neil said that my best motivation for doing this job could be the fear that these kids could be living through exactly what I was at their age. When I heard this, I knew I had to stay and volunteer for this job, regardless of any fears or reluctances I had. As I worked with these kids every Wednesday throughout my senior year, greeting them as they arrived and asking them questions in a small group discussion, these kids restored my faith through their kindness and understanding. Now I would pay any amount of money to anybody that could find me a perfect middle school student. But these kids were in a lot better shape than I was at their age. I started to see that these kids had developed a bond very similar to the one I found in the high school youth group. And it was this bond that was fostering the most emotionally and intellectually wise class of kids I've ever seen. These young teens taught me a monumental lesson about my own life, as it was my duty as a high school guide to seek out those in this youth group who felt alone and unwanted as I did in middle school. They taught me that I could have easily felt the same way as those other kids in my own middle school youth group. All I had to do was open up to them and allow them to accept me rather than shut myself out. I've seen many middle schoolers who started out their experience at youth group the same way I did, but now I can show them that they aren't the only ones in this world who feel this way. And all it takes is a small effort on their part to become a part of this warm spiritual community. I have yet to experience anything more spiritually enriching than the times I was able to interact with these young members of our church body. And as I move on to the next stage of my development, I can leave this wonderful place knowing that the future of both the youth group, church congregation, and my own faith is in awesome hands. Thank you.
Good morning. I'll be honest, this speech took me longer than it should have. It's not that I struggled with things I needed to say, but that I had more things to say than I have time for. But I digress. I've been here with this church for as long as I can remember, quite literally. I was 2 or 3 when my family started coming here. I was here for the renovation of our sanctuary and the installation of the new organ. I remember the old community hall. I remember when the education building was built. I even attended community preschool when the classrooms were still portable buildings. I've been here a long time. From almost the very beginning of my memory, I believed in God, the church, and my family. I didn't have any reasoning for this. I had been told what the deal was with this whole religion thing by my parents, my Sunday school teachers, and a whole host of other people, so much that I just believed it, without really understanding why, or needing to. Every question my Sunday school teachers asked had an answer, and I was usually the one to jump up and give it, and I liked that. Of course, there have been struggles along the way. Doubts, as you know, are hard to predict and even harder to subdue. When I entered into middle school, a lot of fellow students started telling me that my faith was wrong, that I believed in a myth, and that without proof, how did I even know that there was a God? This was a bit of a shock, as I'm sure you can imagine, and I began to doubt what I believed. These were, after all, my friends. They wouldn't lie to me, would they? Then I hit confirmation. In the midst of all of these doubts and outside influences, I had to pledge myself to learning about and believing in a God that I had begun to wonder if he even existed. That was a difficult decision. The questions were a bit more difficult, but they still had concise answers, which I guess was somewhat of a comfort. Throughout the process, though, while showing outward conviction, I internally struggled with what I was learning. In my conflict, I didn't know what to do. And then, in the middle of all of this, the confirmation retreat happened, my doubts ever present. The activities seemed hollow, almost forced, and the questions and answers were all things I knew by heart by now, with no challenges or surprises, though I'm sure my past doubts and present hindsight cloud my vision. It wasn't until I had time to sit by myself, reflect, and read letters from my family members that I realized that I was loved and supported on a profound level. And it clicked for me then that I had a family who loved me more than I could ever imagine, a love so strong that nothing I could say or do would ever separate me from it. Sound familiar? From then on, my resolve towards the church, my faith, and most importantly, my family, was more than it had ever been. No longer was my faith supported by blind obedience and simple attendance at church every week. I had proof, solid evidence, that God exists among us. I guess in a way I identify with Thomas the disciple. I needed proof that what I believed was legitimate. Then came my first mission trip with the church, Miami, 2010. My faith assured, I set out with the idea that I'd meet a bunch of great, clean people and that we'd all set out on some grand, noble, air-conditioned adventure to turn the city of Miami around completely and make it a better place for everyone. I was like Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robin Hood combined into one. A true champion of faith in modern times. Whoops. The reality, like the sleeping common room, smelled much worse than I had thought. However, in my self-deception, I learned that God is not always beautiful in the sense that I had come to understand. I learned to find beauty in the people and places that some considered ugly and undeserving. Even there, God was busy and at work in the lives that needed him most. From there, through high school, other mission trips, the youth band, contemporary services, C2, and today, I have come to realize that faith is not something that can be set, objectified, quantified, or defined. It is something that evolves, fluctuates in strength, and surprises me, but will continue, I hope, to grow throughout my lifetime, however long that may be. My journey of faith has been a long one for sure. However, despite the length, there was a sense that I could always discover and rediscover God in my own ways, and that there was no right answer when it comes to my faith. And I like that. Thank you.
Hello. For those of you who do not know me from C2 services, my name is Samantha Simpson, and I am honored to speak with you today. Just a warning, today my speech will not contain Bible verses. I'm a little rusty on those. When I was younger, I attended community church and loved it. I mean, it was the coolest church around. We had rock climbing walls, tons of arts and crafts, and there was a bunch of songs to sing. How much cooler does it get? However, as I aged and became exposed to subjects such as natural sciences and history, I became skeptical of church and my faith. After learning about practices of religious crusades where people were slaughtered for not sharing the same beliefs, I formed an idea that church was just a way to hold power over people, and it became very unappealing to me. My love for science caused me to question the legitimacy of the Bible. Why should I wake up early, get dressed up, and come to church when I could be spending my time on the boat or something? Before my dad died in 2011, it had been at least 8 years since I set foot in a church, aside from Christmas Eve services in my neighborhood. By the time I returned to community church, my sophomore year, I had forgotten almost everything I learned in Bible study. If you asked me, I would probably be able to name about 0 of the 12 disciples. In fact, I think the only time I read the Bible was last year as a junior, when I needed to ask Neil for help in order to understand what a friend of mine had written in my yearbook. I came back to church not for the religious stuff, but because I'd always wanted to go on a mission trip. After the death of my father, many kind offers were extended to my family as a sign of support. Community church, being one of them, provided my brother and I an opportunity to accompany their youth group on a mission trip to Whitakers, North Carolina. I was excited, but at the same time, really scared. Here I was, way out of church shape, I guess you could say, and about to be on a bus full of religious kids that I didn't know, and some weird guy named Neil who told me I couldn't bring my cell phone. I was worried that all of the religious people that had faith were judgmental. I thought that I could not be friends with someone who regularly attended church without them forcing me to pledge myself to the Lord right then and there, or else they'd think I was condemned or something. I'm the kind of person who likes to be given time to make decisions. One thing I knew for sure was that I did not know for sure how I felt about the idea of faith, and I was not ready to be asked to decide. I was shy at first. I didn't really know what to do with myself in the free time we had. Luckily, we didn't have much free time. Then I was invited to sing with the youth group band. Despite the fact that I barely knew any of the words, I felt really welcomed by everyone I had met, and I had a lot of fun singing. After we returned, I had learned some important things. 1, no one forces religion on you. 2, no cell phone can be a good thing. And 3, I really liked forced family fun. When given the option to come to church and sing with the band every Sunday following that trip, I accepted. Maybe it was the friends, Maybe it was for the music. Maybe it was the guarantee of cookies. Maybe there was something bigger going on within me every Sunday / mission trip / Tuesday night Bible study I attended. Remember when I said earlier that I wouldn't be quoting Bible verses? Well, forgive me, because I lied. The verse that my friend wrote in my yearbook read, "Let your patience show itself perfectly in what you do. Then you will be perfect and complete and will have everything you need." This statement, to me, has become a reflection of my faith that, with patience, has slowly shown itself in all that I do. Although I may not be perfect, my faith feels to me as though it is. I have been given a sense of comfort by this church and a new open-mindedness. It was not the church or the religious people that were judgmental. I was the one guilty of judging what it meant to be religious and forming preconceived ideas of it all. That friend of mine, the one who wrote in my yearbook, and it is now one of my best friends, is someone who I would have never seen myself associating with even. I have been changed and am still continuing to change for the better. For that and the many doors that have been opened to me, I thank you. For the ability to sing in this church before God and not lie, I thank you. I am myself. I am a Christian. And for giving me the ability to be both, I thank you.